What are the best and worst matchups for fantasy football quarterbacks and running backs for the Week 14 games in fantasy football? What do we do with all those bye weeks? It's on breakdown right here, right now, as we begin another edition on a Matchup Wednesday of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. I do have my decider column up. That is the start-sit advice combined with rankings and recommendations there for you on whom to play: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and streaming defenses. There, we're going to go through Week 18. So we're still here. I know it's the verge of the fantasy football playoffs for many. Some have started this week, but we know weeks 15 through 17, typically now this expanded schedule, where you're looking at the sweet spot for your fantasy football playoffs. So we'll get into all the players that you need to look at. We have 6 teams on bye. That's right. 6 teams. That's a lot here. And we will help you navigate through those issues there on the show. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to you on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's dive right in. Now, the bye weeks, we know who they are. The Atlanta Falcons, Chicago Bears, Green Bay Packers, Indianapolis Colts, New Orleans Saints, and Washington Commanders. Now, really, in relation to the guys that were performing in fantasy, yeah, we're going to miss Aaron Jones and Jonathan Taylor and maybe Brian Robinson Jr. for some of you. Christian Watson's been on a heater. Chris Olave has been pretty good, but not a lot there that we're missing this week in relation to how bad it could have been here on the last bye week of the season. It's a big bye, so we'll help you, but there are injuries there that we're concerned about. 2 quarterbacks in particular, Jimmy Garoppolo and Lamar Jackson, are not going to play. We're not going to potentially have Mike Williams and David Njoku for another week. We're watching Kenneth Walker and that Seahawks backfield there. So those are some things we'll get into when we get into lineup Friday, give you the injury updates, because it's hard to know what's going to go on with some of these players without the practice participation. So we'll update that for you and how it's gone throughout the week and their designations there on Friday. So let's go in with what we know here, and we'll start at quarterback here. These are the guys that would no-brainerly play this week, if brainerly is a word. Now, let's start with Jalen Hurts. He's number 1 on my list this week. Big game passing. It just seems like he goes between a big game running to a big game passing. We saw that. He ran all over the Packers and put up those numbers, and then he ripped into the Titans. So whatever the Eagles need to do and that matchup calls for, he does. And here the Giants hurting on the back end. Their pass rush hasn't come through as much. This feels like a running game, however. With the Giants, they're kind of weak in the middle of the field. They're getting gashed by the run. So this is good for Miles Sanders. We'll get into where he's looking at here this week. So good position here for this running game. So you figure this is a Hurts on the ground damage game. So I do like Jalen Hurts. A lot of things that he's going to do there. I think he gets multiple touchdowns, as he usually does. It doesn't matter how they come, right? They're all points. I guess if you're looking at 4-point passing versus 6-point rushing, I think you'd see more potential on the ground this week for Jalen Hurts. But he's been killing in fantasy football all season long. He's been a no-brainer start. Even when he's shaky, he's very productive, and there's no reason to think he won't destroy the Giants. Patrick Mahomes, he owns the Broncos. He's 9-0. He made his first career start against them. Some games he's been required to make a comeback. Some games they've absolutely blown them out. Broncos defense is good, but I'm not going to be too afraid because, again, Patrick Mahomes is relying a lot on a variety of different receivers going inside and outside. So Pat Surtain, too, you take away somebody, but everyone else is going to be open, including Travis Kelce. So it'll be interesting to see how the Broncos play in coverage here. Broncos can be vulnerable against the tight end. I think he'll use his back. So Mahomes is going to be fine. I'm not going to drop him any lower than 2 here. After a little bit of a disappointing game against the Bengals last week, didn't get to the 300-yard mark that he usually has hit all season long, but I think he rebounds big time this week against the Broncos and place he loves to play in Denver. Josh Allen, it's a tough matchup for him, but the Jets proved to be a little bit vulnerable last week against the Vikings, against better receivers, so Stephon Diggs should be a handful for the back end, and I think Gabe Davis could also be going here a little bit more with the big plays downfield. But Josh Allen, no lower than 3. I think he's going to do some running damage as well in this particular matchup. So he might be the entire offense here, passing and running, and that's why I love Allen at number 3. Joe Burrow, he's on a heater now. The history against the Browns is not great. He's never beaten the Browns, which is very interesting. He's Ohio native. We know that. Can he take care of the Browns this time? I think he will. This is a home game. You got Deshaun Watson on the other side, but it doesn't matter. There's going to be a little bit of throwing here for Joe Burrow. You can run on the Browns, but that's not the nature of the Bengals. Even if they get Joe Mixon back with Samaje Perine, they're just not going to pound the ball. They're still going to look for the plays of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So I think Burrow has a pretty high floor this week. I think he gets his first win against the Browns. So I like him at number 4 there. Justin Herbert against the Dolphins. You really have to worry about Xavier Howard, but you can line up the Dolphins. We saw Brock Purdy in relief light him up last week. So Herbert feeling it here with his weapons. Keenan Allen looking a little bit better. He's also a guy that can be schemed open. So Justin Herbert, number 5 this week with all those buys. Tua Tagovailoa at the Chargers. That should be a shootout on Sunday Night Football. Chargers are bad against the run, and you figure the Dolphins will do a lot of that. They can be tricky against the pass, but still are giving up some numbers there, especially when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle there that are tough matchups for that Chargers secondary. And Hill has a great history, we know, from his days in Kansas City against Los Angeles. So Tua locks in at number 6. Now, the other must-start of the week at quarterback I have is Kyler Murray, and this might seem a little surprising. He is facing the Patriots defense on prime time again in a Monday night game this week. But Kyler Murray, the running quarterback, seems to give the Patriots problems. And there are multiple dimensions here because you might get Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch back along with DeAndre Hopkins and what you have on the other side with Marquise Brown. So the weapons are tough here. The Patriots secondary is not very deep, and they can struggle a little bit covering all these guys. They're best actually in the slot with Jack Jones and some of their other guys, but when you look at it on the outside, they can get absolutely destroyed in this matchup. So I don't love Jalen Mills on either of these guys on the outside. So I think it's going to be tough. I think if anyone gets contained, it's Marquise Brown. But when we look at it, Murray is going to deal and is going to do his running. And it's great that he's coming off a bye, so he'll be fully healthy to do that. And he's at home where the numbers are usually better anyway for the Cardinals quarterback. So that's another guy I like. Now, if I'm going beyond that to give you the top 10, I think Dak Prescott is in there for sure. And you look at the matchup against the Texans. I know you can run on the Texans. They've been tough against the pass, but they've kind of changed that a little bit of late. You can't throw. They've tried to shore up the run defense, but their secondary is still pretty bad. Derek Stingley Jr., we'll see if he can go with the hamstring, but that's going to open things up. The Cowboys offense getting a little bit more aggressive. I think they're going to go the old pass to score, run to win this game against the Texans at home. Tom Brady, you have to throw in the 49ers. You can't run on them. So I think Brady's going to have another high volume game, a high floor game. It's San Francisco. He's from San Francisco. This is his last chance probably playing in the Bay Area. He went to college or high school at San Mateo. So we know this is a homecoming for Brady. He's not going to let down here. So he's on my list there in the top 10. And rounding out is Kirk Cousins. Great matchup with the Lions. He owns the Lions. There's nothing scary about that matchup. Those one-on-one coverage opportunities with Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. He'll put up the numbers, and he'll get some resistance as well from Jared Goff on the other side to really rev it up here this week. So those are my top 10 quarterbacks here of the week based on their matchups and how they're playing and all that good stuff. We'll get into other quarterbacks that I would recommend playing this week in my start segment as well as the sits, and we'll take care of that in our next segment. Then we'll start looking at the running backs and the start-sit advice there as well. That's what we do on Matchup Wednesday. Look at the quarterbacks and running backs and how you want to look at them and play them in a particular week. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Taro. Taro is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Taro, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for about any occasion on any budget across the United States, UK, Canada, and Australia. You can book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or a holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're just looking to get from point A to point B and you're on a budget. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits into your everyday life. Many Taro hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions do apply. Forget boring rental cars. Find your drive at Taro.com. All right, we'll continue the show here at Locked On Fantasy Football, looking at the rest of the quarterback recommendations here, the start-sit advice beyond the top 10. We'll do that for you in a moment. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, time to dive into those other quarterbacks that we're looking at as startable this week. So top 10, most leagues are 12. Geno Smith against the Panthers. They might have to throw a little bit more. That's what I noticed last week. The injury to Kenneth Walker, I thought he was going to have a big game. They were going to ride him to victory. Then Walker got hurt. They couldn't get a lot out of DJ Dallas, who also got hurt. Travis Homer was inactive. Tony Jones had a fumble that turned into an interception. So they couldn't count on any of those backup running backs without Kenneth Walker. But they could count on DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and they brought home the game there for the Seahawks in late. And we didn't expect them to trail either. So a lot of things happened in their favor. So you can't assume anything about game script, especially if you have a weak defense the way the Seahawks do. So I think Geno's going to have to put it up. The Panthers, I know, are tough, but Metcalf and Lockett can be tougher here. Noah Fant also getting involved a little bit. So there are definitely sources for Geno Smith to be productive, and he's simply playing well, and you want to trust people that are playing well. Trevor Lawrence was playing well, then he ran into the Lions of all teams and didn't break it down very well, but it's the Titans this week. The Jaguars going to Tennessee, it's just been an absolute nightmare over the years. It's a place that they haven't been able to win in nearly 2 decades here. So, man, it's tough, but I do like this matchup. The Titans are pretty weak on the back end. It's going to open things up for all his wide receivers here. And the Titans could also be playing with a big lead here. That's the other thing you look at. If they continue the streak, if not, the Jaguars can rally and win this game with Lawrence. So there's all kinds of ways to like Lawrence in this one, but his matchups with Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram are all pretty good here. Those are his key weapons. And of course, Travis Etienne on the backfield. I know the Titans are tough against the run, but Etienne can be solid there. That capacity. Now, let's look at what we're looking at with Jared Goff this week. He's going to keep it hot. He's at home. He's really done well at Ford Field this season. When he's been on the road in tougher matchups, he's been bad. But in great matchups at home, he delivers, and we get Jared Goff this week. So I do love Goff here with the Lions, and getting the job done. They're favored in this game, so it should be back and forth between him and Kirk Cousins. So he stays hot after that performance. And the Jaguars and Ryan Tannehill, looking at him, it's a good spot to on the other side of that matchup with the Jaguars. They're going to run the ball. They're going to open things up. Traylon Burks will watch him. Hopefully he's clear from the concussion protocol. I also like Chig Okonkwo to make some plays. Austin Hooper, the other tight end, getting involved here. Robert Woods and Nick Westbrook-Akine, we've seen them take turns here. So Tannehill is developing a pretty high floor here, playing off the run, and I think Henry rebounds here. Again, it's kind of weird because Tannehill's value is connected to Henry's value. If Henry runs pretty well and opens up in the play-action passing game, Tannehill usually does well. And I think Henry didn't do well against the Eagles, and that really squashed the value of Tannehill. I think he'll rebound this week against the Jaguars. Tyler Huntley, he's my streamer guy that I'm looking at this week. If you have Lamar Jackson, go pick up Tyler Huntley. Hopefully he was available, or anyone else, really. He can run and put up the numbers. And really, it was a 10-9 game against the Broncos, very defensive-minded game, and he still put up numbers. He had the 41 yards rushing, had a score on the ground. He looked good taking care of that offense, and we saw those numbers last year as well. Tyler Huntley is capable in this offense. Plug and play for Greg Roman, plug and play for your fantasy teams. And the Steelers defense, not very scary. They're weak on the back end. You can run on them, so that's all good signs here for Tyler Huntley, and I do like the Ravens to win that game. Now, the other side of things that are the weak matchups, you're looking at Derek Carr. I just don't think Derek Carr is going to do all that much. They're not going to have to put it up. You could have Jalen Ramsey shadow Devontae Adams a little bit, but beyond that, I just don't see a lot of numbers. So I see maybe 2 touchdowns, but I could see a couple picks in there. I could see low volume there. So I think you can do better than Derek Carr this week, because this feels like a Josh Jacobs blow-up game. Deshaun Watson, it's buyer beware. I was a little bit too enthusiastic about what he could do last week. He was messy, and really it was messy for the entire Browns offense because they couldn't get Nick Chubb going. So that was one of the more disappointing performances of the week, unless you played the Browns defense. Then you were ecstatic because they scored on a punt return and scored defensively a couple times. So it was great for them, but that doesn't always happen. We know that's a bit fluky. If there's high volume from Joe Burrow, hopefully that can help Watson. They did run a lot with Nick Chubb to win that first matchup on Monday night, so we'll see how it plays out. But looking at this situation here, I would avoid Watson until he shows me something that I feel comfortable with. Daniel Jones, the Eagles have some weaknesses, and you can run on them a little bit and throw in the middle, but Daniel Jones is too hard to trust there against the Eagles defense. I'm not going to trust Mike White either. Numbers were okay, but he only got 1 touchdown with 300 yards, had the turnover against the Vikings. So numbers are okay, but I'm not going to go with him in this tough matchup. Mac Jones, the numbers say you could play him against the Cardinals. I just don't trust Mac Jones, especially the dysfunction of the offense with Matt Patricia and others. Kenny Pickett, the Ravens defense, we saw what they did to the Broncos last week. I know it's Russell Wilson, but it's a rookie quarterback this week. I'm not going to go with Kenny Pickett. Russell Wilson, no way. It says by the numbers you could play him, but I'm not trusting Russell Wilson at all. And Brock Purdy, he's a pretty good guy to look at to facilitate the 49ers offense. But when you're looking at it, Jimmy Garoppolo has to be very calculated the way you play him in the right matchups. And you would say, if Garoppolo's in here, would you really force him in the lineup against the Buccaneers? I don't think so. So keep that in mind. I think it's going to be a heavy run game, spread it around a little bit here. But I just don't see Brock Purdy exploding. I think he's going to be more of a facilitator this week, much like we saw Mike White in that matchup against the Bills. Now, quickly, let's go through the running backs that we're going to start with no problems this week. Just roll them out. And Austin Eckler keeps it going against the Dolphins. That he just can keep rolling as a receiver and runner. They had a lot of problems with Christian McCaffrey last week. That bodes well for Eckler blowing up. Derrick Henry should rebound nicely. He loves seeing the Jaguars, and it's at home this week. Josh Jacobs, as we mentioned, should pound the Rams. You got weekend last week, got a break without Kenneth Walker. That changes with Josh Jacobs in there. Nick Chubb did well against the Bengals the first matchup, so I think he rebounds and keeps the Browns in the game. Christian McCaffrey, the Buccaneers can't struggle with running backs. I know Alvin Kamara did not do anything, but he hasn't been doing anything against anyone. McCaffrey is more dangerous. I do like him at number 5. Ramondre Stevenson is going to be involved here. We'll see about Damien Harris if he can return. He's had a long layoff since the Thursday with a thigh injury, but if not, you're looking at Stevenson, regardless, getting those big numbers. And he's pretty solid even when he hasn't scored because of his receiving usage there. Saquon Barkley, it's a tough one against the Eagles based on the game script. The Eagles have tried to shorten their own defense. They did contain Derrick Henry last week. So Barkley is a little bit big run dependent in this game, but you can get those, and we like that. Miles Sanders is former Penn State protege / teammate. I like him just as well as Barkley this week. The Giants matchup is just that good for running backs. Tony Pollard, he's not necessarily the starting or lead back for Dallas, but in terms of what we're looking at, production, explosiveness, does more less touches. It's Tony Pollard there. He comes in at number 9. That great matchup against the Texans. Joe Mixon or Samaje Perine. I think there's a potential you could play both. If that's how bad this Browns run defense is, should Mixon return. I have Perine backing up Mixon. I've simply plugged and played him, and I've gotten great results here. There. So that's why importance of handcuffing in the right situation, and this was one of those situations. Ezekiel Elliott comes into the top 12 as well against the Texans because he's going to score a touchdown. You look at Dalvin Cook against the Lions. He's been up and down, but I think this matchup is good enough. DeAndre Swift, good to see him getting going. I have him right back-to-back with Jamal Williams. I think they'll both be involved quite a bit against the Vikings. So good scoring all around from the quarterbacks and the running backs this week. in that game. Dameon Pierce, the Cowboys can be running a little bit. The game script is what we're worried about, but they got him enough touches last week. The Texans did in the blowout. So, again, a little bit easier of a team than the Cleveland Browns, not necessarily a juggernaut, but I think Pierce is still going to get the volume there that you're looking for. And Travis Etienne Jr., he's going to have to do it more as a pass catcher this week. It was a bit disappointing, maybe coming off the injury there against the Lions, but I think, again, he can get those receiver. So there's your top 16 running backs for the week. So, yeah, it's been a tough position to navigate for sure. We'll get into the start sits in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. So those are maybe the tougher decisions of that position as we try to navigate through this bye week. We told you at the top this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by BetOnline. And we have a big time of year here. We got NBA, NHL starting to get real during their seasons. You got a big tournament going on in Qatar. The World Cup is getting into the close to the end knockout stages here, so the excitement is ramping up there. We still have the rest of the NFL season. Don't forget about college football bowl season. Well, BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Check them out at BetOnline. Head to the website today and use mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, it is time to close the show on Locked On Fantasy Football with our running back start and sit segment. So let's dive right into that. Jeff Wilson Jr. Raheem Mostert is kind of limited there, but I do like Wilson bouncing back in this game. He did disappoint that matchup against the Texans, and I knew the 49ers matchup was going to be tough, the revenge game narrative aside. He wasn't going to do all that much, but the Chargers can be just destroyed on the ground, and that's how every team is beating them. That is not improved. Their defensive line situation has been depleted. They got to feed Wilson here to get a win, and that usually happens when a team gets inconsistent pass game. So I do like Wilson quite a bit. D'Onta Foreman will watch his health here, but he should be good to go against the Seahawks, and that's a matchup that you can exploit as of late, given what the Josh Jacobs and Cam Akers did in that spot. So D'Onta Foreman in a good position as the Panthers' power back. Here, Isaiah Pacheco, the Broncos, by the numbers, are tough to run on, but it's the Chiefs. He's been hot. He's been used a little bit more. They need him in the running game there. So third straight week for a touchdown, I think, is coming for Isaiah Pacheco, that defiant rookie from Rutgers for Kansas City. Cam Akers, speaking of him, gets the Raiders this week. There's no one else here. They got to hand him the ball. Looks like a lot of Bryce Perkins. I know they added Baker Mayfield, but it's going to be a run-centric game plan to attack the Raiders, and you don't want to get Perkins in an uncomfortable situation. Akers catch passes. The dump box can rack up there as well. So I do like Akers having a good game and possibly having one more touchdown here after scoring 2 against the Seahawks. Gus Edwards, rebound game for him. The Steelers are still struggling against the run. I think they'll hand it off. J.K. Dobbins they're going to be careful with, so don't worry too much about him. But I feel like the Ravens are not getting the love they need here in this matchup against a pretty weak Steelers defense. Given up the numbers last week, they gave up the numbers to the Falcons and Marcus Mariota, similar team, but I think a better executing team here with Huntley and Edwards with those capacities. Latavius Murray, they're going to have to handle the ball often. We don't know if Cortland Sutton's going to play with a hamstring injury. Jerry Jeudy playing through an ankle here. They're going to have to get him going at some point. So Latavius Murray has a good history against Chiefs going back to his days with the Raiders, had a long touchdown run against them. So I think Murray will be effective, and he's getting the volume there. And he just plugs away. He's one of those talented guys that can fit any scheme and can run in the right matchups, and this is one of them here for Murray. Zonovan Bam Knight is going to be the guy against the Bills. They got Michael Carter nursing the ankle injury. Ty Johnson, forget about that. That was just a little bit of a cup of coffee. But between Breece Hall and Zonovan Knight, this Jets team has added some good young running backs. So I think you'll see Hall and Knight being the combination next year. But wow, it is fun to watch Zonovan, and he's going to continue to get the volume in this particular matchup against the Bills. Even a little tougher. They're good in coverage. They can contain the run with Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano, but still, you got to play him based on the volume and replacement status here. Rashad White and Leonard Fournette lead our backs that we're not as hot on. You might have to play them based on the bye weeks and not having a lot of depth. Might have to play both of them depending on how things are going, especially in a PPR league. But it's tough. I mean, you're not going to get much from them in the way of rushing. They're both going to be receiving dependent. I don't know what you're going to get from either playing off each other. So something to be concerned with. Where you have Najee Harris, the Ravens are nasty against the run. They destroyed Latavius Murray and the Broncos last week. This offensive line not good at all. Dan Moore Jr. They got to replace that left tackle. He just does not look good consistently here, and has hurt them with holding penalties alike. It's going to be rough against Ravens. Avoid Najee Harris. Now James Conner. I think this is the one thing the Patriots are going to do is take away the run and force Kyler Murray to beat them through the air. That's why I like Murray, but I do not like James Conner this week. Again, you might be stuck playing him, but just accept it's going to be a tough one here against that Patriots run defense that sprung some leaks against Devin Singletary and James Cook last week, but I think they'll shore it up this week. Speaking of Singletary and Cook, look at that transition. They're playing the Jets. I don't know what you're going to get now. Singletary is pretty much useless given how Cook cut into his value, and the Jets are pretty good against the run. We know that. Dalvin Cook was absolutely shut down last week. Raheem Mostert, it's not his backfield. It's Jeff Wilson. So, again, Mostert might be worked in. He could have pulled off a long touchdown coming in there, but he's a speed changer base back. Wilson is the guy with speed, but also the guy that they would feature a little bit more in that matchup. So, I think Wilson a little bit shiftier, Mostert maybe a little bit slower there by this offense, waiting for the holes to develop and all that. So, I don't like Mostert. I do like Wilson quite a bit, and I just don't trust Mostert's touches. And same thing with Kareem Hunt. Got a little bit more run. I mean, we looked at the game against the Texans. A lot of the Nick Chubb limitations was the fact that they all of a sudden gave Kareem Hunt a lot of extra touches. If you looked at the numbers there, Chubb would have had a big game if they had involved Hunt all of a sudden after multiple weeks of kind of just using him as a limited passing receiver there. So when we look at it, Kareem Hunt is not a guy that I'm looking at to play this week. But again, you might be stuck with some of these guys playing, and we just have to look at that and accept the best there with our running backs. It's just been a rough year for running backs, and it continues here with the bye week having Aaron Jones and Jonathan Taylor off at a very critical juncture of the 2022 season. So there you have it. There's a look at your matchup Wednesday for quarterbacks and running backs for week 14. We will come back tomorrow looking at wide receivers, tight ends, and defenses. Same deal. Ranking started. Sit advice. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen. For your next listen, check out Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your day. And we'll catch you tomorrow to break down wide receivers, tight ends, and defenses only on Matchup Thursday.